Hi everyone, this is Alex at Salmonella Place, and this is my first in a series of interactive lectures. Today's topic is neuroanatomy, the ascending and descending pathways of the spinal cord. You can find this lecture both on YouTube at our channel youtube.com/The Salmonella Place and on our website www.thesalmonellaplace.com. I'm going to give you some basic guidelines on topics that I found difficult studying, but I would urge you to read the university material that you're given. Like I said, it's just guidelines, and each university has their own specific information that they want you to know. The book that I used to make my lecture notes today is Clinical Neuroanatomy by Richard S. Snell. I'm using the 6th edition. That's number 6. However, there are updated versions that you can buy either online or you can borrow from your local library or find in the medical school library. Please subscribe to our channel. And if you need anything, you want to request a specific lecture or you feel we've left something out, please comment below this video or send us an email at info@salmonellaplace.com. That's info@salmonellaplace.com. I hope you find this helpful. Enjoy studying. So everyone, we are on our second slide, and here you can see a cross-section of the spinal cord right here. On the left side of the slide, you can see the motor and descending pathways listed. This corresponds to the right side of the spinal cord, which is right here. And on the right side of the slide, you can see the left side of the spinal cord. This is a little bit confusing, but just imagine that we are here standing facing the person who we are talking about, and their back is here. That's why we've got right with left and left with right. Now, let's talk about the sensory and ascending pathways. These are sensory because they correspond to pain perception, touch, and feeling. They are afferent fibers because they are moving from the periphery, from for example, the hands, the feet, to the brain. The brain is the center. So imagine you're moving from outwards inwards. And that's another reason why they're called ascending. The ascending pathways are divided into 3 main tracts. Number 1 is the dorsal column medium lemniscus system. These have 2 subtypes, which are the gracile fasciculus and the cunate fasciculus. These are 2 smaller tracts which make up the bigger tract. Then, number 2, we have the spinocerebellar tracts, posterior and anterior. These correspond to where in the spinal cord they are. So as you can see, the posterior one is right here, the anterior one is right here. The anterior-lateral system is made up of the lateral and anterior spinothalamic tracts, which again correspond to where they are situated within the spinal cord. Lateral here and anterior right here. And a smaller one, the spino-olivary fibers, which are anterior laterally. Now let's go on to the motor and descending fibers or pathways. Motor, because they control the movement, mostly musculoskeletal, and efferent fibers because they are descending. They are moving away from the center, from the brain to the periphery. These are divided into 2 main tracts, pyramidal and extrapyramidal. The pyramidal tracts are the lateral and anterior corticospinal tracts. This is because these fibers, the corticospinal fibers, accumulate in the medulla oblongata in a place known as the pyramid. So the extrapyramidal tracts are all the other descending tracts that do not accumulate here. As you can see, the corticospinal are both posterior and laterally, corresponding to where they come into the spinal cord, either sacral, lumbar, thoracic, or cervical, and anterior medially in this section right here. The extrapyramidal tracts, the rubrospinal tract, which you see here, medially. The reticulospinal tract, which has two, both posterior and laterally and anterior medially. The olivospinal tract, which you can find here anterior medially next to the vestibulospinal tract. So I hope this drawing was clear to you guys and you have an overview of the tracts. Now I'm going to go into them in a little bit more detail. So everyone, we are on our third slide, which is the ascending somatosensory pathway number 1, otherwise known as the pain and temperature pathway. As it's probably obvious to you, the stimulatory sensation, the stimulus for this pathway is pain and temperature. What happens is we feel pain and temperature through our receptors, which are the free nerve endings, and they take this stimulus to the first order neuron, right here, the posterior root ganglion. It then goes into the spinal cord, into the lateral spinothalamic tract, which we saw on the previous slide, and synapses onto the second order neuron in the substantia gelatinosa. The stimulus then travels up the spinal cord until it reaches the medulla oblongata, where it changes to the spinal lemniscus. Once it travels through the pons and then into the midbrain, it synapses on the third order neuron. This is the ventral posterior lateral nucleus of the thalamus. That's the ventral posterior lateral nucleus of the thalamus. From there, it goes on to the internal capsule and the corona radiata in the cerebral cortex. Its destination is the posterior central gyrus. On to slide number 4. This is the second ascending somatosensory pathway, otherwise known as the light touch and pressure pathway. So, like we said before, the stimulus is light touch and pressure. These are picked up by the receptors, which are the free nerve endings, and they go into the first order neuron and synapse there. This is in the posterior root ganglion. This goes into the spinal cord, into the anterior spinothalamic tract, and synapses on the second order neuron, the substantia gelatinosa. It travels up the spinal cord into the medulla, where it changes to the spinal lemniscus, right here. And then once it reaches the pons and the midbrain, it synapses onto the third order neuron, the ventral posterior lateral nucleus of the thalamus. This tract is very similar to the previous one, but like we said, the stimuli are different. Once it gets to the thalamus, it continues on through the internal capsule and the corona radiata to the cerebral cortex. Its destination is the posterior central gyrus. So guys, this is slide number 5, and we are on the somatosensory pathway number 3. The stimulus, which is a little bit more complex than the other two ascending pathways, is discriminative touch, vibratory sense, and conscious muscle joint sense. The receptors that pick up these stimuli are the Messiner's corpuscles and the Panetian corpuscles. Also, muscle spindles and tendon organs. So what happens is these stimuli travel to the first order neuron, which again is the posterior root ganglion. These travel into the spinal cord using the fasciculi gracialis, cuneatus, and later on the medial lemniscus, and they synapse on the second order neuron, which are the nuclei gracialis and cuneatus. So we don't get confused here, let me just state the tract between the first and second order neuron is the fasciculi gracialis and cuneatus. We have them right here. And these tracts synapse on the second order neuron to the nuclei gracialis and cuneatus. They travel up the spinal cord into the medulla oblongata, and there they use the internal arcuate fibers and the cuneo-cerebellar tract. From there, they use the medial lemniscus, which we have right here, and they travel on to the pons and the midbrain, finally synapsing on the third order neuron, which is the ventral posterior lateral nucleus of the thalamus. So the third order neuron is the same for all three ascending somatosensory pathways. From this third order neuron, they pass into the atrial capsule, into the corona radiata, and finally the cerebral cortex, where the destination is the posterior central gyrus. As we finished with the ascending tracts, now we're going to move on to the descending motor pathways, and this is the first one. It's called the corticospinal tract, and there are two subtypes, the lateral and the anterior corticospinal tracts. These make up the pyramidal tracts, and like I mentioned before, they are called this because the corticospinal fibers accumulate to form the pyramid in the medulla oblongata. The function of this tract is rapid voluntary movements at the distal ends of the limbs. This tract originates in the homunculus of the motor area of the cerebral cortex. There are primary and secondary areas. The primary area is Brodmann area number 4, and the secondary area is number 6. Also, fibers can originate from the parietal lobe, Brodmann areas 1, 2, and 3. The next step in the pathway is the corona radiata, then the posterior limb of the internal capsule. This tract does not go through the thalamus, however it passes close to it in the middle 3/5 of the basis of the pedunculi. It then goes on to the midbrain and the pons, and in the medulla oblongata, it crosses at the site of decussation of the pyramids, just here. And then from then on, it descends as the lateral corticospinal tract. Its destination is the internunical neurons or alpha motor neurons. These are found at the thoracic level of the spinal cord. During its descent, it gives several branches to the cerebral cortex, the basal nuclei, the red and olivary nuclei, and the reticular formation. So guys, on to the second descending motor pathway. known as the reticulospinal tract. This is the first of the extrapyramidal tracts. As I mentioned previously, only the corticospinal tracts are known as pyramidal because they form the pyramid of the medulla oblongata. All of the other tracts are extrapyramidal. They are not included in the pyramid. This tract's function is to inhibit or facilitate, depending on where in the body the tract ends up, the voluntary movements. Now, what happens is the cerebral cortex is where this tract originates, and it travels to the midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata, in which there are a bunch of different fibers forming the reticular formation. So let me say again, we're talking about the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. These three contain fibers making up the reticular formation. Now, the pons, right here, gives off fibers which form the pontine reticulospinal tract. These descend as uncrossed neurons in the anterior part of the spinal cord. The medulla gives off fibers forming the medullary reticulospinal tract, and these neurons descend in the lateral part of the spinal cord. These two tracts, the pontine and medullary, also carry fibers that stem from the deep cerebellar nuclei. They cross over at various levels, and their destination is the alpha and gamma motor neurons. This tract does give off several branches. There are multiple ones at different levels during their descent. So guys, on to slide number 8. This is descending motor pathway number 3. It's called the tectospinal tract. Again, the second extrapyramidal tract, and the third descending motor pathway. Its function is reflex postural movements concerning the sight. This tract originates in the midbrain in the superior colliculus. It crosses over soon after origin in the midline in the medial longitudinal fasciculus. Its destination is the alpha and gamma motor neurons, and it gets to these motor neurons by traveling to the upper cervical segments of the spinal cord, where it terminates upon synapsing with the internunical neurons. This tract does not give any branches. Now we are going to talk about descending motor pathway number 4. This is another extrapyramidal tract called the rubospinal pathway. Its function is to activate flexor muscles and inhibit extensor muscles. It starts off, as most of the tracts do, in the cerebral cortex and descends to the red nucleus. The red nucleus also receives fibers from the deep cerebellar nuclei. The red nucleus is at the level of the superior colliculus, and it's situated in the tegmentum of the midbrain. The red nucleus gives fibers that descend through the rubrospinal tract. The site of crossover is immediately upon release from the red nucleus, at the level of the nucleus at the midline. They descend through the pons and the medulla and synapse on the alpha and gamma motor neurons. Again, this is another pathway that does not give branches. The next pathway I would like to talk about is the descending motor pathway number 5. It's called the vestibular spinal pathway, and again, it is an extra pyramidal tract. Its function is to activate the extensor muscles and inhibit the flexor muscles. This tract works in the opposite way of the previous tract, the rubrospinal tract, so please remember which tract activates and inhibits which muscles. This tract originates in the vestibular nuclei. These are found spread throughout the pons and the medulla oblongata. They are situated on the beneath the floor of the 4th ventricle. These nuclei also receive afferent fibers from the inner ear through the vestibular nerve and from the deep cerebellar nucleus. Once the fibers leave the vestibular nuclei, they descend uncrossed as part of the vestibular spinal tract, and they synapse upon the alpha and gamma motor neurons. This tract does not give branches. Next descending motor pathway, number 6, is the olivospinal tract. It's an extra pyramidal tract with an unknown function. Now there is much debate as to whether this tract actually exists. Theoretically, however, this is what we know. It originates from the inferior olivary nuclei, which collect fibers from the cerebral cortex the globus pallidus and the red nucleus. These fibers, as I said previously, collect in the inferior olivary nuclei. They then descend and cross at the brainstem, and they synapse on the alpha and gamma motor neurons. This tract does not give branches. The last tract that I'm going to talk about today is the descending motor pathway number 7. It's called the descending autonomic fibers, and it is listed as an extra pyramidal tract. There is again some debate whether or not these tracts or subtracts actually exist. However, due to some investigation of spinal cord lesions, these have demonstrated that they could theoretically exist. Their function is to control sympathetic and parasympathetic systems. They originate from the higher centers of the central nervous system, which are in charge of autonomic control. These are the cerebral cortex, the hypothalamus, the amygdaloid complex, and the reticular formation. As these tracts descend, they cross over in the brainstem. Their destination is the autonomic neurons in the thoracic, lumbar, and mid-sacral regions, which control sympathetic and parasympathetic outflows. They do not give off branches. This is the end of my first interactive lecture. Thank you for watching and listening. Please subscribe to one of the following. This is our website. You've got our YouTube channel right here, the Salmonella Place, where you will find this interactive lecture. You will find the slides from this lecture on the website. You can download them. Also, you can follow us on Twitter. You can buy our merchandise on Zazzle.com. You can like us on Facebook. We have a page and a group. And this part is really important. If you have any questions or you want to request a specific lecture, please don't hesitate to comment below this video or send us an email at info@salmonellaplace.com. That's info@salmonellaplace.com. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you found it helpful, and please stay tuned because there's going to be more of this coming. Good luck studying. Bye.